Hello, my name is Steve Dana. I work on the network team at the WSWHE BOCES. And today we're going to speak about text-based evidence or text-based answers in the 612 literacy standards for the Common Core Learning Standards. Before we go any further though, I'd like you to stop this webinar and gather the various materials you'll be referring to during the session. And those materials include the PowerPoint, which is a PDF file, the Southeast Exotic Pest Plant Manual, the native versus non-native species document from the Fund for Lake George, a graphic organizer, and the 612 Standards for Literacy, all of which can be found on our WSWHE BOCES website under Race to the Top. So let's go to the PowerPoint and move through that. We have three essential questions that will guide our webinar this morning. One, how do I bring more complex texts into my classroom? Whether you're an ELA teacher, a middle school or high school science, social studies teacher, technical subjects teacher, the point is Common Core is asking for us to bring more complex text into the classroom. Today we're going to look at a strategy for doing just that. A second question is, how can I encourage higher levels of student thinking using the Common Core Learning Standards? How can we move up Bloom's taxonomy from the knowledge comprehension level to the evaluation synthesis levels? And then how do you find time to make all this happen? Is there time to incorporate Common Core Learning Standards and still cover the content? As a former science teacher, there's a lot of material that needs to be covered. I understand that. And yet when you do these sorts of rich, deep readings in class, you'll find that you can indeed cover the content and do so at a much greater level of understanding for the students. One of the guiding documents that we used is from the PARC group, and the document is called the Model Content Frameworks, and I'm actually going to take you now to their website and show you the actual resource. This is PARC, the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, and within that we have the home link is right here. And then you would choose the In the Classroom link and scroll down, you will find the Model Content Frameworks, and those are for math and ELA, and interestingly enough they've done webinars which are quite good that describe the format of those documents. And there is a webinar on this that you can learn more about that document. And while we're on the web, let's take a look at our BOCES webpage, and again the documents that we're using today can be found on the right side under Race to the Top. You'll click in there and then you'll find resources tied to our webinars within the page. So let's return to our PowerPoint. So we are today looking at the first column, reading complex texts. And what exactly does that mean? Well, reading complex text is basically having kids read closely and directly examining meaning to thoroughly understand and, where necessary, reread deliberately. It's about productive comparison and synthesis of ideas. It's careful gathering of observations. Reading complex text. Why do we do it? Well, there's a lot of research. First of all, when we pay attention, we learn. Reading close text is basically paying attention. And there's a lot of research regarding that. When you pay attention, you do better. When you close read, when you pay attention to what you're reading, you do better with reading and reading proficiency. In a like manner, it allows the student to reflect on the meanings of the words, the sentences. It gives us pause. It brings richness to the text when we read closely and the complexity of higher level text. How do we do it? Well, we find documents that have a qualitative or quantitative nature that's rigorous, and that in this example that we're doing today ties to the content and the curriculum. As a former scientist, I was looking for something that was informational complex, and related to the area of invasive species. But the point is, we find documents that are rigorous, relevant, and have the complexity that will stretch our students. And then, of course, after doing the reading, it's then asking students to use the reading. To use the reading to defend arguments, to organize their thoughts, and to make presentations, to debate. There's a whole host of different strategies one can use once we've had the students engage in the complex text. As we know, there are 6 shifts in ELA, and through this exercise, you're going to see that we've hit all of the shifts. Shift 1, balancing informational and literary text. We're asking teachers to integrate much more informational text into their curriculum. Building knowledge in the disciplines. As I mentioned, I'm a science teacher. This activity today is going to build knowledge in the science discipline through some informational text from an organization that studies invasive plant. Another one is staircase complexity, raising the bar, so to speak. Text-based answers, using the text to find answers, to find solutions, and citing the evidences in those answers. Writing from those sources, and then of course academic vocabulary, the varied tiers of vocabulary that one crosses in these higher level readings. So let's start with the task. And this task was something that my colleague Courtney Jablonski and I did with administrators and teachers on 2 different occasions now, and it was well received, which is why we're sharing it here. What I'm going to ask you to do is to take the Southeast Exotic Plant Council document, which is this document right here. And if you have not gotten that document, it is at the website se-eppc.org. It is a manual, and again, these documents are available on our webpage. But what I want you to do now is I want you to read the document, and I want you to read it closely. And you're going to read about a plant called the Eurasian water milfoil, and in this manual you're going to learn about ways, first of all you'll learn about the plant, and then you're going to find different strategies for dealing with the plant. It's a short document, but it's complex. There's a lot of higher tiered vocabulary, and it would fit perfectly in a biology class. As you read the text, I want you to circle what you think is important, those words you think are important. I want you to underline the words you didn't know. And in the margin, I want you to jot down things you found really interesting and things you would like more information on. At this point, you might want to pause your webinar to do that task. So, I'm sure you learned a lot about Eurasian water milfoil in the past 10 minutes. If we were doing this in a group, I'd ask you to get up and find a partner and to share the words that you underlined, the unknown words, the parts that you thought were important, the things that you found especially interesting, and any questions you've had from that reading. And then we'll get to this later, but what would be the 612 literacy standards that we just addressed in this activity? As I said, we'll get back to in a second. I want to share with you some of the observations that were presented to us when we did this with a number of educators and teachers. Some of the unfamiliar words that they found were glabrous, family, herb, parentheses, submersed. Many people didn't realize that herbs can be submersed. Schizocarp, rhizome, booms, and naturalized species. So these are words that we identified as unfamiliar. Text people felt was important. Well, one is that the preferred habitat of Eurasian water milfoil is fresher, brackish water. Someone described Eurasian water milfoil as the bed bugs of water. They're easy to pass around. I thought that was a great analogy. We found that altering waterways promotes the invasion of this species, and that the introduction of a foreign plant to a new habitat leads to phenomenal growth, and that's often the nature of invasive species. Without any indigenous predators, you get an abundance of these critters, which can really upset the ecosystem. And another one people felt was important was the herbicide fluoridone is not dangerous to humans. Things they found really interesting. One was that it was accidentally introduced, which is often the case with these exotics and invasive species. The second is that 33 states east of Mississippi had the same issue. Eurasian water milfoil most likely escaped from an aquarium or aquaria, and when you change the environment, you can really screw things up. Questions people had were, one, are we doing the herbicidal controls in Lake George? Now, Lake George is a beautiful regional lake. It's a tourist destination in our neck of upstate New York. And we have a slight problem in the Adirondacks with Eurasian water milfoil. So one question is, are we using those kind of controls? A second one is, why are we still unable to knock this critter out of our lakes given these various controls? How do we supervise the controls? And what is it like in Eurasia? In other words, is Eurasian water milfoil a problem in Europe and Asia? So, with that exercise, let's take a look at the different shifts we've just hit. We really hit shift 2, knowledge in the disciplines. And this is a 3-column document which comes from Engage New York, which again is accessible through our webpage. And it's 3 columns, the first being what the student does. When you do knowledge in the disciplines, you can see we're having the students become better readers. They're handling primary source documents with confidence. Ultimately, we ask them to infer, like a detective, and to use that evidence, which we will do later in this session, to argue or make a point. And we see the text itself as a source of evidence. What does a teacher do in this type of a shift? Well, it's no longer I teach reading. We all are reading teachers. I'm teaching reading to help children learn. That's the key point here. And we slow down our classes so children learn depth versus breadth, because we know that a mile-wide curriculum is not nearly as meaningful and long-lasting as a thick, rich, deep curriculum. We recognize the different approaches for the different types of text we bring into class, that the text itself is a source of evidence, that we can have students write about evidence from the text. And then, of course, what does the principal do? Well, we support and demand that all teachers advance student literacy. It is no longer the domain of ELA teachers. And that when we are given permission by our administrators to take chances and to slow down and teach deeply, students will respond in kind. So this is shift 2, knowledge in the disciplines. So here's our next scenario. Let's imagine Mrs. L is in the middle of her high school environmental science unit on ecology, and she's covered in detail the impacts of invasive species on local aquatic ecosystems. Students have learned about predator-prey relationships, food and energy pyramids, and all the elements of ecology. Mrs. L is now ready to apply the literacy standards and the real-world invasive issue of invasive species into a student exercise. So again, with that background document, the Southeast Exotic Plants Council Manual, we recognize that there are 3 management controls for Eurasian water milfoil: mechanical, herbicidal, and other. We also know from another document that is available on our website, which you have seen, which is the native, non-native species. This is the, I'm taking you to the webpage right now, this is the Fund for Lake George. And in that, they have a piece on invasive species, and the children will have read that document, learned what's happening within New York State and Lake George in particular, the controls being used, and this part in particular is very relevant to the exercise that we're talking about. So, with all that in mind, we know that in Lake George, hand harvesting and benthic mats have been the methods used to control the EWM, Eurasian water milfoil. So here would be an appropriate student task. Based on the invasive plant manual, which you had read, and the Lake George Fund article, which you can read, what would be the most logical method to battle the spread of Eurasian water milfoil in Lake George? So what we're doing now is we're asking our students, look, you've read about the manual on these invasive species. You read about what's happening in New York State regarding the species. Given that information, use those documents and other material and evidence to identify which is the best method, most logical method, to battle the spread of EWM in Lake George. And then we ask the students to defend your claim with details and evidence. Now, there is a graphic organizer I want to direct your attention to, and I'm going to pull that one up right here. This comes from New York City, Informational Benchmark Skills. It's a simple chart, claim, evidence, and interpretation. So after the students have read the articles and they've made their claim, I think the best method is benthic maps. I think the best treatment is herbicide. They have to cite evidence. What are the examples, quotes, references that you're using to support your claim, and what is your explanation and/or analysis? So it's a tool to help organize children's thoughts. If I'm doing a differentiated approach to this lesson, I may not give this organizer out to all children. I might just give this as scaffolded support for certain children. So, back to our PowerPoint. The children would proceed and do the task, and what we're asking them ultimately is to argue. And we have a woman in our region. She's a library media specialist and an inquiry-based learning expert, Mary Ratzer, who with her colleague Paige Yeager have had a great influence on our region in terms of rigor. And Mary has a quote which I love, which is, "Argument is at the heart of the Common Core learning standards for English language arts." Short and simple, but it gets right to the point of Common Core and rigor. So I'm going to ask you now to look at the standards for writing, and I want you to look at the standards for reading, and those standard documents are in the 612 literacy standards, which begin on page 76 in the Common Core Learning Standards. Standards for literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects. And you would use that document to identify which standards were addressed. And then, given that information, if you were to do something like this, what adjustments would you make? What different tasks could you have the science teacher do to integrate the literacy standards? In our work with our colleagues, in terms of reading, we identified that Common Core Learning Standards for reading that we addressed were standards 1, 2, 4, and 5. And for writing, we found that we hit standards 1, 4, 5, 9, and 10. In addition, we could easily have hit standards 6, 7, and 8 with an extended project. And we could have also hit additional reading standards through an extended project. Regarding writing, shift 4, text-based answers. What the student does, go back to the text. Find the evidence to support your argument. Whether you think it's benthic maps or some other manual method, or you think it's an herbicidal treatment or other treatment to eradicate or at least control Eurasian water milfoil, prove it. Use the evidence from text. What this also does is it develops a fascination with reading. And since it's relevant, we work hard to find relevance in what we present to children and to our colleagues. Kids are more apt to want to read this material because for many of them, they've been to our Adirondack lakes and they recognize the beauty of those waters, and they also are concerned, as we are, about species that just don't belong in the lakes and what they might be doing to the habitats. What does the teacher do in this text-based answer environment? Well, facilitates discussions, the guide on the side. Having students learn, to find the evidence and to develop a sense of confidence to do just that. To plan and conduct rich conversations, keep students in the text, have them ask, and again, read to learn. And then what does the principal do? Obviously, besides this, the important support, giving teachers time to plan, to develop curricula, and to rewrite their instruction so that children are doing much more with literacy within their various content subject areas. So when we finish this whole exercise, there are a few conclusions. And I'm going to go back to our camera at this point and speak about those. Okay, first of all, when we're integrating Common Core learning standards into the classroom, or when we're teaching anything for that matter, rigor and relevance matter greatly. We're looking for things much more than beyond knowledge and comprehension. We want children to apply what they're learning into real-world, unpredictable scenarios. We want children to synthesize, to create, to analyze, to evaluate. We want them to do the higher order thinking skills so that they're going to have lasting understandings of these important concepts. Second thing is, when we do this kind of exercise, we're teaching children to closely attend to what matters most. And we know that when we attend to something, we're going to learn it much more so than if we just listen and take things on a more cursory level. We also want to recognize that there are many ways to integrate Common Core learning standards into all disciplines. And that's not just the domain of our ELA colleagues in 6th through 12th grade. It's the responsibility of everyone. And I'm hoping that this webinar and these supporting materials will help you, either as a professional developer or as a teacher, to have a strategy for incorporating more use of informational text into your classroom, and to use that informational text to challenge your students to think and apply, to analyze, synthesize, evaluate, and to further embed those Common Core learning standards into your curriculum. Have a great day.